All right, so today we're going to talk about the evidence of evolution. So Darwin had argued that living things have been evolving on Earth for millions of years, and there are various lines of evidence for his claims. There are 5 that we are going to talk about. The first being fossil record, the second, geographic distribution of living species, third, similarities in anatomy, fourth, similarities in embryology, and last and most important is biochemical similarities. Okay, so there is technically no debate about whether evolution actually occurs, but the debate is how does it occur. So the first piece of evidence is fossil record. So we all know what fossils are, right? Yes. Okay. All right. So a fossil is a remnant of ancient life. So it's the remnants of something that was once living. So when we think of fossils, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Dinosaur, sure. Okay. So when we compare fossils, okay, fossils from older rock layers and fossils from younger layers, scientists are able to document that life has changed over time. Okay, so this shows us that change over time in the rock layers. So typically, where would you find the oldest? At the bottom, right? And then it gets newer as we move up. Number 2 is geographic distribution of living species. Okay, so many distinct species look similar because they face similar pressures of natural selection. So if you look up here, we see 4 different organisms, a coypu, a capybara, a muskrat, and a beaver. Now, if you look at them, there's some similarities, but they also have some differences. What? I don't know if I did. I might have. I don't know. So what are some things, just looking up here, that stand out that might be somewhat, what? Tail, okay?
So, their face.
Their face, what did you say? The size, okay. Oh yeah. They're webbed, you said, that's what you said? Webbed feet. For swimming. Tiny what? Tiny necks. Okay. Their what? Their ears. They're all similar color, brown. Okay. So they all have fur. So if you look over here, this shows you where we find these organisms, right? So this kind of takes us back a little bit to earth science. Who took earth science in here already? Okay. Earth science, we talk about the big continent. What was that called?
Pangea.
Yeah, Pangea. Sure. Okay. Which stated what? Look at you go. All right, smarty pants. I like it. All right. But in earth science, you should have learned that there were organisms that still went to different places, right? But if they can't cross water, how'd they get there? So that was correct. So that was part of the evidence of continental drift. Okay? So some animals also share a common ancestor, but they look different because they adapted to different environments. Okay? So this takes us back to what we talked about the other day with finches. They have different size and shape beaks. So depending upon where they live. So the modern day finches of the Galapagos are now distinct species, okay? But they all likely descend from a common ancestor. And we talked about that the other day. And that was blown off course from the shore of South America. Y'all good? All right, that takes us into number 3, which is anatomical similarities. This is super, super important. Okay, there are 3 different structures we're going to talk about, and you need to be familiar with all 3. So when we talk about anatomical similarities, we're talking about the examination of anatomy or our body structure, and specifically of living animals. So this shows us one of the 3 structures, which is homologous structures. We talked about the word homologous before. What word can we pull out? Homo, which means the same. Okay. So homologous structures are structures that have different functions. So don't get these confused. Okay. But develop from the same embryonic tissue. So different function, but they're going to have similar structure. So for example, you see a human, a dog, a bird, and a whale. And you can look and see that the sizes might vary, but anatomically they have similar structures, but do they all do the same thing? No. Okay? Because a human hand, does that do the exact same thing as a dog's paw? No. Okay, what about a bird's wing or a whale's fin? No. Okay, so they do have different functions, but anatomically the same. So this takes us back to the idea that species share a common ancestor. Next are what are known as vestigial structures. And vestigial structures are features that are present in modern animals, but they're no longer in use. Okay, so they may have served a purpose earlier in life, but they don't serve a purpose now. And some of the big ones for us are our wisdom teeth. So you can live without your wisdom teeth, right? Who's had their wisdom teeth out in here? Anybody? All right. So wisdom teeth is one. Another one is your tailbone. Where's your tailbone? Right at the very bottom of your spine, right? What? Your appendix is another one. That's yes. So you can live without your appendix. It doesn't really serve a major purpose.
You can live without it.
You can.
You don't want to.
No. All right, and then the last one. Say what? The last one is analogous structures. Okay, so these have similar shape and similar function, but the organisms are not related. So the wings of a butterfly and the wings of a bird. Okay, so they're both used to do what? Fly. Okay, so they have the same function because they're used to fly, but their structures are going to be different. So this is opposite of homologous. So homologous, structurally, anatomically, they are the same or very similar, but function is different. Here, the function is the same, but structurally, they are different. Does that make sense? All right, number 4 is similarities in embryology. So now we're talking about embryos. So an embryo is obviously unborn. So many embryos look similar during certain stages of development. So you can have a list of organisms, and at the very early stages, they all look very, very similar. But then as they start to develop over time, that's when you start to see differences. So up here, they kind of look similar, right? But those are 4 completely different organisms. From a fish to a human. So once again, these all show us that there is some type of common ancestry. That's a quail. And then last but not least, and probably the most important, is biochemical similarities. So this is comparing DNA sequences, and this reveals possible evolutionary relationships. So we've seen this before, okay, similar DNA leads to similar amino acids, proteins, okay, and therefore that tells us that there is some type of shared ancestry. So if you are ever asked a question about the evidence for evolution, this biochemical is the best piece of evidence for evolution. Okay, that's something that sometimes pops up and that is super important. And then obviously if we were to compare DNA sequences, the more similar the DNA, the more similar the amino acids, the more closely related those species will be. I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. So if you look up here, who is most closely related to the unknown? So this is our unknown, and you're comparing DNA sequences to figure it out. The bat, okay? So AAG, AAG, and then it's CAT, this is AAT, and then AAC and CAC. So those would be the most closely related. Does that make sense? Because you're going to see some of this today. This just shows relatedness between species as well. Okay, so this shows how closely related human, mouse, chicken, zebrafish, horse, and a fruit fly. Okay, so there is some commonalities in the DNA. The mouse. Okay, here's another one, and we're going to see something kind of similar to this with cladograms. So if you were to look up here, who would obviously be the closely related to a human? The monkey, okay? So the closer they are together, the more closely related they are, the further away, the less related.
So like the chicken and the frog.
Because they're close together, yes. But we would share more with the chicken because they're closer than we would with the frog or the lamprey. Okay. And we're going to talk about that after this. Okay. So at the end of the day, all living things on Earth share the same DNA, the same ATP, and then the same genetic code. So this shows us, key thing here we've seen throughout this whole PowerPoint is that all organisms come from one common ancestor. Questions?